Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Donna Martinez. Welcome once again to another edition of Shaftesbury Society, coming to you live from Midtown Raleigh, the headquarters of the John Locke Foundation. Today, I have another great panel for you, a panel of leaders in the school choice movement here in North Carolina. This is our final installment in our Thoughts and Thinkers Leadership Series. It's a special Shaftesbury Society series that we have been doing all month long here in August, and I hope you have been able to see the previous installments and the panel discussions. Just some great people, great issues that we've had a chance to discuss and get to know some of the folks who really are making a difference in North Carolina. Today, we know that we're still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the last 18 months or so has really turned all of our lives upside down, particularly for parents of school-aged kids. They have had so much to deal with trying to make sure that kids are still receiving an education. But some say that if there is a silver lining at all to this terrible situation that we've been dealing with, it is the fact that moms and dads have gotten kind of an up close and personal look at their kids, their aptitudes, their challenges, how they relate to teachers and other kids. And that, in fact, has spurred more parents to seek more personalized education. Today we're going to be talking about what those opportunities are here in North Carolina, a state that leads in the school choice movement in our country. Our panelists today, Shamika Bethay, she is the Engagement Director with the Frederick Douglass Foundation of North Carolina. Angie Cutlip is a homeschool consultant with ATC Educational Services. Linda Lynn Kakadelis is the Executive Director of the North Carolina Coalition for Charter Schools, and my colleague, Dr. Terry Stoops. He is the Director of the Center for Effective Education here at the John Locke Foundation. Folks, thanks so much for joining us. Really appreciate you doing us. Shamika, let's start with you. Tell me what it is that you and your organization are hoping to do, how you're hoping to impact the lives of kids and parents.
First, let me begin with telling you a little bit about the Frederick Douglass Foundation. The Frederick Douglass Foundation is a national grassroots public policy educational organization. And we have three goals, which is to educate, enhance, and empower people. So that kind of gives you a feel where I'm going to go with my answer. It is to educate, enhance, and empower people. What I'm finding out is that many of our parents do not know what parents' choice or school choice is. And so, what we endeavor to do with the Frederick Douglass is connect resources with the people. We're a grassroots organization, so we're always in the community, whether we're sponsoring an event or we're making one on one contact to answer those questions. So that's what we desire to do and influence policies that if we see something that is affecting students or parents in a negative way, we're the voice of the people.
Well, that's terrific, and I should tell folks that they are actually located, but Shamika is located in the Fayetteville area right now, and so lots going on with school districts around the state for sure. We're going to get to some of those things that you have seen and how you've tried to address them. You know, one of the things that has happened during this pandemic is that more and more parents have decided that maybe homeschooling is the option that they would like to pursue for their child. And Angie Cutlip does that for a living. Angie, tell us what it is that you have seen in your particular sector of the school choice movement.
Hi, Donna. Thank you so much. And I'm here in Wendell, North Carolina, in eastern Wake County. One of the things that I have noticed is that I feel like that COVID has been the catalyst for many families to realize that they can homeschool and to realize, I think if we can say anything positive about the pandemic is that it has expanded school choice, especially as parents have been monitoring their kids learning at home and realizing issues with their kids. Many of the families that I work with, some had been thinking about homeschooling as a school choice. Some had never, ever considered it. And what I have found with working with these families is that many of the families have said, you know what, I can do this. And so I think that has been something that is a plus. That's kind of an oxymoron, but if you could say a plus of the pandemic is that it has expanded school choice.
Linda Lynn, I know that you are in contact with people all over North Carolina, and your goal really is to give parents the tools and to help influence public policy that makes it easier for parents to personalize that education. Tell us about the last year and a half from your perspective.
Well, as in everybody's life, I think what we're going to be doing is saying pre-COVID and post-COVID, my life before COVID, my life after COVID. It's been very interesting. Charter schools turned on a dime. I mean, immediately they went, to virtual education and were extremely successful. There was data given to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee, extremely successful in educating students through the pandemic, beginning in 2020 and then all the way through last year. You're right, Donna. The biggest issue we're facing right now is just information for parents, and then also for local boards knowing what to do. The legislative session has been extremely difficult as for charter schools. The district schools were able to market and offer online education beginning last spring, but there was issues legislatively that prohibited charter schools from continuing the very successful virtual remote education options they provided for families. And so we started advocating last spring to give charter schools the same option as the district schools had by providing some type of virtual education. The best we could do was we couldn't get the legislative action needed until last Thursday. And in fact, it's the bill sitting on the governor's desk today that will provide charter schools to provide that remote virtual option for this coming year. So it's been very difficult for parents to know exactly what option they could have for this fall.
Terry, you have been trying to keep your fingers in all of these different pieces here that all of our guests have mentioned as we've gone through the pandemic, and you've really tried to harness every piece of information and every piece of data that you can to try to help parents and to inform them and guide them. Tell us what that's been like.
Well, it's absolutely been a challenge, and the best way to think about school choice is to think about it in two separate buckets. There's the side of school choice that doesn't really need any help. Homeschooling would fall into that category, whereas they can get some assistance from the government when they can get some possibly some regulatory relief from the government. It is mostly a movement that is able to generate its own energy. But there are other parts of the school choice movement that require legislative action. And those are the parts of the charter school community and our private school voucher community that require legislative action. And that means getting the information into the hands of legislators, so they not only know that there's a tremendous demand for these types of educational options, but there are instances where legislators have to step in and do things to provide either regulatory relief or an increase in funding or some other type of assistance. And given that some of these programs rely on a tremendous amount of public money, sometimes there's a reluctance among legislators to do that. So we are really about putting information in the hands of lawmakers and in the hands of the public as well, because even though we've had charter schools in North Carolina for 25 years, we've had homeschooling in North Carolina since the mid-'80s. There are still a tremendous number of families that don't know what kind of options they have available. And so even getting that base level of awareness to the options that are available can be a challenge depending on where a family may reside or what their circumstances may be. So we are launching really I think a really laudable effort here at the John Locke Foundation to get more involved in the grassroots side and in trying to disseminate this important information, along with the mission that the John Locke Foundation has had for decades, which is to make sure that our lawmakers have the very best information at their disposal and are making decisions consistent with the needs and the desires of families.
Now, obviously, the pandemic was something none of us anticipated, and how it's played out. We've really had to go week to week, month to month. But it seems to me, as I watched it, that parents needed a bureaucracy to be nimble. Parents needed policymakers to make quick decisions, because there were kids literally sitting in living rooms trying to figure out, okay, how do I log on? Or, what is my lesson going to be today? Who is my teacher today? Is there a real classroom waiting for me? So one of the things that this has really showcased to me is that everything really should be more personalized, more individualized, and that's so darn hard to do when you have tens of thousands of kids, hundreds of thousands of kids, and a bureaucracy that just can't simply do things quickly. Give me your perspective on this. Anyone who wants to jump in is fine.
I would agree with you, Donna. After serving, because previous life, I served on the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Board of Education. And so I did serve on a large board, and it's very difficult to make quick decisions in a system like that. And again, like what Terry was talking about, the public schools with charter schools versus district schools, we are under legislative action. And that makes it difficult. I don't want to do a commercial for homeschooling right here, because I do support charter schools, but I will tell you that you want to have the quickest turnaround, then you homeschool. And I think that's what was shown during the pandemic, is that
I agree.
And parents can take that and create what they need for their child very quickly. I think we're also seeing that demand, though, with charter schools. The parents voluntary association, they can come, and with the knowledge they have, they can find the school that best fits the needs of their child.
Linda,
I think that's actually, oh, sorry, go ahead, Shamika.
Go ahead.
I think that's exactly right. And I think a lot of people don't realize that every state, it's now legal in all 50 states to homeschool. It's not always been that way. But I think it's important for the public to know that each state sets the homeschool laws. And so every state has different regulations and guidelines that we have to abide by. And I think that is something that is important to understand. And going back to what Donna said, is you actually described the beauty of homeschooling, is because homeschooling is about creating a one-of-a-kind learning experience for your child. I was a public school teacher. I tell people I've seen both sides of the fence. I was in the public classroom as a teacher for 11 years, and I've homeschooled for almost 21 years now. And my greatest challenge as a public school teacher was differentiating instruction to meet the needs of all the different types of learners in my classroom. And the beauty of homeschooling is that you basically have an individualized instruction plan for your child.
Yes, I will agree with both Angie and Linda about the customization when it comes to homeschool, because we found that so many parents could not make decisions because of the education system was moving so slow. So, for example, they said we were going to close down for 2 weeks to make sure COVID was going to subside. And then after 2 weeks, and then it was like, okay, it was extended, then everybody's going to go to virtual. And so it was so many decisions, but it was one size fit all. And so by the time the end of the school years in public school, by the time the end of the school year, you had kids or students that never went back to school. People didn't know where they're at. I was online last week, and I was looking at the student performance records for Cumberland County. I could not find that information. When I went to the report card, it showed the absentees, it showed everything, but between 2019 and 2020, I couldn't find the performance. But I was able to read an article that was done by an independent study, and it was showing at the end of November that our students in public schools were 5 to 10% decline in math and reading. And so because it was such a slow turnaround for the policies that needed to be made, it hurt so many students, and then parents didn't know what to do. Some parents had to quit their jobs. Some parents had to take their children to work. So at the end of it all, it was the student being hurt by our inability to customize their education.
You know, Terry, some of the most emotional conversations I think I've ever had, as long as I've been doing this and, you know, talking with people about public policy, is when you talk to a parent who believes many times accurately, particularly during COVID, that their child isn't getting what they need. Because every parent, doesn't matter what your background is, doesn't matter where you live or anything, every parent wants the best for their child and is willing to fight for the best for their child. And that seems to me is what has really come out, and parents have kind of awakened in many ways to what it is that their child is and isn't receiving. And so perhaps then, Terry, out of all of this, we are going to come to maybe a little bit more direct involvement with parents. Is that a Pollyannish view of this?
No, I mean, I hope this is the genesis of a parental involvement and parental empowerment movement that we have never seen, and this might very well be the catalyst for that. I have two high school boys that have taken advantage of different types of educational options, and I'm grateful for the ability to be able to provide those options for them. One was in a charter school, one was in public school or district school, and now both are in a magnet school in Wake County. But what I'm hearing is that many schools have wait lists that can't be overcome. And that not only includes charter schools, but that includes private schools. And so when you have parents that are eager, willing, and sometimes even desperate to do the right thing for their child and to find an educational option that meets their needs, they're coming up to these wait lists that are insurmountable. I mean, there was a worry when the pandemic broke out last year that private schools were going to have their enrollment obliterated, because the concern was that parents were going to lose jobs, and that means that they were going to lose the disposable income that they used in order to finance their child's education. And the same is true for homeschools, where individuals would have to pick up extra jobs and therefore not be able to educate during the day. So there was a real concern that school choice was going to take a huge hit, like we've seen when the economy declined significantly. We saw similar declines during the Great Recession. And so there was a real concern that there were going to be private schools that were going to be no longer financially viable because of the recession that would result from the pandemic. Well, the truth was that rather than a recession, the economy rebounded fairly quickly, and parents looking at what their options were and looking at the complete chaos really that was occurring before the beginning of the last school year were opting to send their kids to private schools and charter schools and homeschool at record numbers. And it really isn't any hard to understand. I mean, Governor Cooper didn't decide the school reopening plan until around early to late or early to mid July. And so that gave districts very little time to be able to adapt to what that school reopening plan was going to be. Parents didn't really want their kids sitting in front of a computer screen for 6 hours a day. And so we saw that there were a lot of circumstances that combined to make it really difficult in some cases for parents to be able to find the educational option that best met the needs of their children. But in other cases, all the impetus in the world to be able to leave the district system that was totally unprepared for this, and a government that really botched the preparation leading up to the 2020-21 school year. And now we're seeing the aftermath of that is that parents took advantage of these options and their kids loved it. And now they're going to stay in those options indefinitely because they've seen a transformation both in the academic side and the emotional side in their children.
So is this all seen still as a threat by some in the education establishment? You know, I always find it interesting that on the one hand, if you talk one-on-one with an educator, they will talk very much about individual kids and how important it is to reach individual kids. Yet when we talk about choice, there tends to be an institutional pushback. Is that still there, and what do we do about it if it is?
Yes, I mean, Donna, there's no question that it's still there, and it's heightened because of the threat, because parents have said, wait a minute, I do have options. I do have choices. And so it has heightened. I think the letter that was put out by the public school network that criticized charter schools in North Carolina sent the letter to the U.S. Department of Education. And now, there's an investigation from Washington on some of our charter schools here in North Carolina because of the access grant that was given to them. Now, listen to this. That was given to them right before the pandemic to increase our economically disadvantaged numbers in our schools. And it was done right before the pandemic. And now the letter came out saying, oh, they haven't achieved their goals. Well, we've achieved a lot of goals. And it was just totally one-sided. They were using pre-COVID data to try to prove some resegregation. And even now we have some media here in North Carolina. That's the myth, or what I would say the lightning bolt. If we resegregate, thinking that people are divided by race on enrollment in charter schools, which could be nothing further from the truth. And so we see media about that. And so anyway, all that to say is that the invisible war, and I would call it a war, between those in the education establishment that are petrified and, philosophically against any form of school choice, homeschool, charter schools, the new smaller, what we call micro schools starting. They're against them all. And the lies and the miscommunication that's going out is only going to heighten.
Angie, one of the pushbacks that I have heard over the years about homeschooling is that, well, that means that those kids are A, isolated, and B, they're not going to get the education that they need. Talk to us a little bit about your sector of the choice movement and how things, the resources, and academically, how kids do if parents choose a homeschool situation.
Oh, absolutely. Research has shown that homeschool kids, when a parent makes a choice to homeschool and they're involved with their child's education, that homeschool students do exceptionally well. There's no discrimination in the military as far as students who are homeschooled, no discrimination in colleges, universities, or the workplace. Students actually do very well. Probably the greatest criticism that we're hearing about is, oh, well, they're not going to be socialized. Well, we've definitely taken a paradigm shift from that, because now we have kids 6 feet apart in schools. They're not allowed to sit with each other and talk at lunch. I've heard of one parent called me. She took her kid out because her kid talked during lunch and got in trouble because they weren't supposed to talk while they were eating lunch. And so all those myths, I think the pandemic has actually helped to debunk some of those myths, because students actually do very well. But my youngest daughter is my last daughter to homeschool. She's always been homeschooled. One of the opportunities that students that are homeschooled can take advantage of is Career and College Promise, which enables them to actually do college work while they're homeschooled. And on the first day of her English 111 class last week, I think it was last week, a week before, she was assigned a paper, and the paper was to determine whether or not the students needed to take remedial work or if they can continue on. And she was so excited because she got the top score. And she's like, Mom, the teacher said only 2 people in the class got the MLA formatting right, and that was me and another student. And I kind of had wondered, I wonder if that was a charter student or another homeschool student in the class that actually got that right. And it wasn't because I actually had taught her MLA formatting, but she knew how to learn. She knew how to figure out what she needed. And we're finding that colleges actually look for homeschool students, because, this is just an average. Every homeschool family is different. But by about 7th grade, most families who have taken on the philosophy of homeschooling by the time the kids are seventh grade, most of the time parents have been instructors up to that time, and then they move from being an instructor to being a facilitator. And so kids learn to be independent. They learn to learn how to learn. And so I think that is something that is very important.
You know, that's a fascinating progression. So it sounds like it's a learning experience, no pun intended, for the child as well as the parent. And independent thinking and learning how to do things on your own and analyze on your own as well is such an important life skill. You know, Shamika, I know that you talked about the mission of the Frederick Douglass Foundation of North Carolina, and it feels like school choice is right in your wheelhouse for what it is your group's trying to do.
Exactly, it sure is. And one of the reasons why we advocate for school choice, well, we like to call it parents' choice because it gives parents the option instead of making it seem like school choice that the school has the choice. But it really, what using the word parents' choice, it informs people, or it informs parents that they have a choice in their children's education. Um, and we've noticed that a lot of in lower socioeconomics group have large portion of minorities. And so and those minority children, a lot of them are very smart, they're intelligent. However, the schools within that district do not have the resources to help them be prepared for college, be prepared for going to a tech school or entering into debate or whatever specialized skill that they need. The district school does not have it. So when we promote parents' choice, that means that parents can identify what their child needs and send them outside that district or homeschool them, and they can still receive the quality education that they need. We understand at the Frederick Douglass Foundation that children are different. They have different personalities, they have different learning abilities, and different ways that they learn. And so when you start looking at the public school is more so one size fit all. If you're outside of that, whatever that normal is, then you're pushed to the back burner. And so with us coming in and promoting parents' choice, empowering the parent, they can actually do what's necessary to prepare their child for the future, because that's what parenting is about, right? That we're preparing children, preparing kids for the future. These are leaders. And so that's one of the things that we feel that is very important, and it meets our mission statement.
Donna, along with that, Session Law 2021-117, Regulatory Reform Act, I've been working a couple of years now to make sure that we get information to NC pre-K. Now, those are the students that are in early kindergarten, the year before kindergarten, to tell the parents what choices they have. And those are the parents that are the economically disadvantaged that Shamika's talking about. And do you know, it literally took legislation to get NC pre-K to tell parents all of their options. And that law just got passed this year that DHHS will now have to have a website that families can go to and look at all of their options, including opportunity scholarships, charter schools, and public school choice. I mean, all of them. But about 50% of the counties, the NC pre-K program was ran by the school system. And so at 4 years old, they were just told, you go to the 5-year-old kindergarten, that's your choice. You know, that's where you go. And many of the lower income families had no idea they had other options.
That's so disheartening to know that it took legislation just to make information available. Terry, I know that one of the things that you have been doing for years now is keeping track of enrollment. You know, there is a narrative that says that schools of choice are really about the cream of the crop student. You hear that phrase a lot, that it's a parent who is already very engaged and maybe has a high education attainment level on their own that will opt out of a traditional district school. But if you look at the data, it's quite diverse. Tell us about that.
Yeah, well, first of all, just as a general number, about 77% of students in North Carolina, school-age students, are in district schools. So that means that there's a massive number of students that are obviously in home, uh, um, private, and charter schools, and this category of other. There's a variety of other alternative schools in North Carolina that they can attend. So when we look at demographics, especially in the charter school sector, because there's this little nugget in the charter school law that says that charter schools have to resemble the racial or demographic makeup of the district in which they reside. And so there's this constant refrain that charter schools are not doing that. There's this drumbeat that they're promoting resegregation, when reality is, as a whole, if you look at the demographics, really the only group that charter schools don't quite measure up in compared to districts is the percentage of Hispanic students. And that percentage has been increasing significantly over the last few years. So it's just a matter of time before, as a statewide matter, that charter schools, their demographics resemble the district statewide district demographics in racial and ethnic categories. Now, the idea that charter schools have to resemble the ethnic and racial makeup, and of course Linda Lynn can talk about this, is kind of an interesting rule, given that in some charter schools, including the one that I co-founded, Carolina Charter Academy, students are coming from multiple counties. They're not just all coming from one county. So that means that the resembling the demographic makeup looks differently depending on where that charter school is located and where the students are drawn from and which multiple counties that they're drawn from. But also, charter schools are required to have a lottery, conduct a lottery when it comes to their enrollment. So this is a random process. You can't decide, except in certain circumstances, such as having a weighted lottery, determine which students are being enrolled in your school. You can only accept the students or the families that apply, and then use a random process, a lottery, to determine who gets admission. So this is
How does
a
it
way
then
for
become a movement that is somehow promoting resegregation if this is done by lottery?
Yeah, it's kind of hard to resegregate when you can't pick the students that are going to the schools. And we've seen increasing diversity in our private school sector, and of course our homeschool sector. So the idea that these methods of choice are resegregating is assuming that there is some mechanism playing behind the scenes that's causing the resegregation, that's causing students to get sorted in certain ways, when in reality what is happening is parents are making choices. They're making choices based on their needs, and those choices don't always correspond neatly to the categories of racial and ethnic makeup that we would desire for each of those schools. And so, the idea that there is some mechanism happening behind the scenes that's actively resegregating schools is really silly. And it is really offensive when you consider that there was a time in American history where there were active mechanisms behind the scenes that were actively trying to resegregate schools based on race. That's not what's happening here. And to call it resegregation, I think, is a real insult and a real mischaracterization of what's happening in the school choice movement.
Donna, I would like to comment on this one. I think that the reason why they are calling it resegregation is because, and what I mean by they is those that are so pro public school that they cancel out parents' choice to school choice. Because they're the ones withholding the information for the lower economic community, which is mostly minorities. So if you withhold information for people, then they will not use the resources that's available. That's why you have grassroots team on grassroots efforts like Frederick Douglass Foundation is trying to push that give them information, because those avenues, thank God for the new legislation that was passed, but before they were the ones putting these mechanisms in place. You withhold information. If people don't know, they will not take advantage of the resources, and so they feel frustrated because they're stuck in a system, and the only thing they know to do is to push through. Regardless of the way they turn out, they just continue because they feel like as though that is their only option. So the more that we are on the ground, we're informing parents that you have resources, then you'll see even a more increase in Hispanics, I believe, because we're getting the information out there.
Shamika, that's the same in homeschooling. There's an increase in diversity, and it's not just a feeling. I can tell you, I do testing in North Carolina. We might talk about this later. One of the requirements is that you issue a nationally normed standardized achievement test each year that you homeschool. And over the past 20 some years of working with homeschool families, some of my greatest success stories have been out of the Black community. I had a family from Durham. The mother was not only homeschooling her kids, but her grandchildren. I think there was like 7, and they were all below average in the public school system. She recognized it wasn't meeting their needs. After coming to me making curriculum recommendations, she cared about her kids' learning. By the time all those kids, they're all graduated now from homeschool. Every one of those kids that were below the national norm were either at the national norm or significantly above the national norm at the time. And I see that in the Black community, the Hispanic community. I also see it with students with special learning differences, how homeschooling is such a benefit.
Angie,
go ahead, Shamika.
I wanted to agree with her, because when you empower people with the right tools, whether just giving them the information to decide whether they want to homeschool or charter school, or let them stay in a public school, which public education school you want to go. But when you empower people and give them the right tools, we have very intelligent parents. We have very intelligent parents that can make the decision for themselves and not the system making it for them.
Shamika, you just brought up a really interesting point, and that is that, one of the other myths, as I like to call it, about the school choice movement is that it is anti-district school or anti-public school. And actually, in my view, it's not, because of what you just said. It's about empowering parents with the information to make the choice that they believe is best for their child and their family. And for a lot of parents, that is going to end up being a traditional district classroom, and that's their choice. So it's really not anti-public school. And I know, Terry, you deal with pushing back against that a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly parents should be able to choose the school that best meets their needs. And if that's a district school, that's fine. But the district school, unfortunately, assigns students based on where they live most often. And those students that are assigned to schools in an attendance zone that are not meeting their needs are the ones that tend to be most disadvantaged. Because if you think about how public schools, how district schools work, the best schools are usually in the more affluent areas, and that's where all the expensive housing is located. That's where people flock to. And so we really do a disservice by requiring students that live and that are assigned to schools in district schools that are in zoned areas that have had usually generationally bad schools. These are schools that have been bad for many, many years, and don't allow them the choice to go to another district school, perhaps a school that is in one of these affluent communities. The fact that we don't give them that choice, I think, is probably one of the ways that we as a nation have failed our low income and children of color, because they are mostly zoned to schools that fail. And by withholding choice from those children, we just perpetuate cycles of poverty and crime in ways that aren't necessary. If a district embraced choice the way that all of these other choice types have embraced choice, then I think that we would be much better off, certainly as a nation, much better off as a state. And I think parents would be much happier in the types of education that their children receive. But unfortunately, districts don't think in terms of parents, don't think in terms of choice. And therefore, their motivating factor has nothing to do with ensuring that children that are isolated in poor areas get access to the best schools. Their interest is simply perpetuating a status quo that has empowered them and empowered those who work for them.
It makes you wonder what would happen if we changed the way we actually fund education and gave parents essentially the ability to have a little bucket of money and make their own choice about where it is that they want to go.
Donna, I totally agree with what both you and Terry just said. And I just want to remind everybody that's listening that, Ronald Reagan wanted to do away with the Department of Education. He was extremely successful in tearing down the Berlin Wall. He didn't get a brick from the Department of Education. And so what we're fighting is truly David and Goliath. However, David won the battle. And I think as we continue to educate people, and what Shamika is doing is so important. What Parents for Educational Freedom is doing is so important. What we're doing in the charter school world, even though we are public schools, giving parents the choice. And like what Shamika said, I think we all should start saying parents' choice. And with that saying, the establishment that is anti-parent choice, anti-parent, because we want all schools to be good. We want parents to have lots of different options for children. And I think the pandemic, like what was said earlier, I think the pandemic is putting a crack in that establishment thought that there's only one way to educate.
And again, I would say, and right now, only one way to fund. And I really wonder if maybe getting back to the information issue, if parents start to understand that, hey, there is another way to do this rather than sending money directly into a system, but having the money attached to a child, if that would kind of advance things as well and maybe, introduce a new concept to parents where they would say, hey, wait a second, I'm a taxpayer. There are dollars appropriated to educate my child. Why is it going over here if I think the best place for it to go is over here?
Well, and I think we saw that in Florida in the last election. I mean, you get down in the weeds. It was the African American mamas that put the governor, Ron DeSantis, in his seat. At the end of the day, they came out in droves and voted because they knew that if he was not elected, their child would not be able to continue the choice program that was given to them.
Terry, I know that you have been writing a lot about the issue of funding. Where does that actually stand? I mean, is there momentum towards that, or are we really stuck right now?
We're really stuck, and a lot of that has to do with the massive amount of federal money that's been coming down. I think lawmakers have been so focused on trying to figure out what to do with the billions of dollars that we've received from the federal government in the name of COVID relief, that the idea of reorienting and reorganizing our finance system has gone by the wayside. We've seen a couple of the champions for a student-based funding model leave the General Assembly. And there doesn't really seem to be the urgency to move to a student-based funding model at this point. We have a very complicated system. In fact, I would go as far as to say it's a ridiculous system that's worthy of ridicule because it makes so little sense in the way that we fund our schools. And now they are flush with cash in a way that they have never been. And so I think it's going to be years until we get the kind of motivation within the General Assembly to reorganize our funding system and perhaps rethink the way that we fund our public schools. I will add this, and I meant to say this earlier, that we're going to get test scores that are coming out on Wednesday. These are test scores for our district and charter schools. And I think that once parents get a good sense of what happened academically this last year and see what I believe will be a significant decline in student performance in our district, especially our district schools, that there will be a new urgency for school choice throughout this school year and going into next school year, because I think parents are going to be shocked and horrified at just how much of a test score drop there has been. So Wednesday, we're going to see test scores coming out. And I think this is going to be an additional element that's going to fuel our school choice movement in North Carolina.
You know, if Terry's prediction is true and those adjectives are really kind of, make you take notice if things are bad when those scores come out, will there be parents who say, look, I just can't put up with this anymore, something has got to change? In other words, is that going to, in an odd way, help move the movement forward because parents will demand better?
Oh, I think so. And I think it's a time now too when what Terry was talking about with the whole K-12 funding issue. It's been studied forever. I mean, we're talking possibly, Terry, I would think 20 years. There's been two studies on it. And we need to start asking candidates and legislative members, because we have lost some that were very much in favor of doing exactly what you said, Donna, putting the money in the backpack of the child and letting that follow the child to whatever school. We need to, in the school choice movement, I think, need to make that a big issue in the coming years.
So let's talk a little bit. Go ahead, Angie.
I don't think that increased funding has showed to be a correlation between increased achievement in schools as well. And maybe Terry can speak to this. I have a Facebook group, which is where I try to help empower, like Shamika was telling, and let people know about their choice to homeschool or other options as well. There's about 14,000 families in North Carolina in the group. And I made a post recently about the tax credit bill and the knee-jerk reaction of everyone, even if it was meant to be for good, just because it puts more money back into the pockets of the parents. The knee-jerk reactions among most of us who have been homeschooling for a while is leave us alone, hands off our homeschool, because we see it as, if the government's going to be telling us this, and that's going to put more regulations on us. And I mean, I actually was in support of that particular tax credit bill. I didn't, as long as there were no regulations, no strings attached. But comment after comment after comment was no. So Terry, can you speak to the tax credit issue?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And the tax credit issue is about a $1,000 tax credit for homeschool families. And what's interesting about this is that Republicans have been reluctant to tinker with the tax code in the past because they did a huge overhaul of the tax code. They really streamlined it, and so that meant getting rid of a lot of the tax credits that were targeted to certain groups. And so there's this a belief with some Republicans that perhaps revisiting the tax code for the benefit of choice and for the benefit of certain parents would make sense. And this homeschool tax credit is one instance of that. You know, that there is always the threat of regulations, that there will not be regulations with this tax credit. And I think it's important to note that lawmakers, especially Republican lawmakers, are very mindful of the fact that homeschoolers absolutely don't want more regulations on what they do, because the reason why they have been able to thrive is because of the regulations have been absolutely minimal. The great thing about the homeschool movement, especially in North Carolina, is that if you push them too far, they will unleash an avalanche of phone calls and emails, unlike any special interest group in the state. And so the one thing that I could say is, if we did get $1,000 tax credit and there were some lawmakers that decided that they were going to use that as a way to try to push homeschoolers around, I believe homeschoolers would push back in such numbers and in such force that those regulations and changes would be squashed immediately. So that's the one thing about having such a large homeschool population in North Carolina. By the way, we have the largest homeschool population as a percentage of our student population of any state. It's not even close, of any state in the nation. So we are the premier homeschool state in the United States right now. But the benefit to having a homeschool population the size that we have is you can't push them around because they will push back.
Okay, thank you for that. And if you take all the homeschoolers in North Carolina, it's still larger than the number of kids in school in Wake County. I guess we're probably is homeschooling the second largest district and I think the numbers are probably higher than even the 20% increase numbers that I have seen.
Yeah, it would be the largest school district in the state. It far surpassed Wake County, and it will, at this point, will never be overtaken by a district.
You know, talking about regulations and trying to kind of keep things separate, keep the homeschool movement happy and kind of on their own to be able to have a minimal amount of regulations. I know, Linda Lynn, in your area with public charter schools, that is something you deal with all the time. Talk to us a little bit about moving forward, where you see the challenge and where you see the biggest opportunity to help, once again, empowering parents by making some sort of public policy change that would advance the charter school movement. What are you working on?
Well, right now, we had to fight it off this last year, but not, I mean, you know, it comes up every year, is to replace the cap on charter schools. We've got over 70,000 families now on wait list across the state for charter schools. So what we're watching, and we're safe right now. And of course, it's every election, it has consequences. But to reinstate the cap, to stop the growth. And then Terry mentioned earlier that about a little thing in a line in statute that says that charter schools should represent the demographics of their district. Well, we've had a state board member pull that out and make that, it says, it doesn't say shall, it says may, you know, would like to represent the district. Well, he has made this kind of, you know, the pivotal, what charter schools should be like. And therefore we're hearing again, resegregation, and nobody's doing that. It is a straw man. Because when you look at a district, and I served in Charlotte Meck district, when you look at demographics, it doesn't mean that the demographics look at that way in every school. So Charlotte-Mecklenburg has over 100 schools. There are some schools that are predominantly maybe one race than the other race. And so they're asking charter schools to represent the district demographics when the districts don't even represent the district. So again, this and I'm not going to say school choice anymore, this anti-parent choice rhetoric with the myths. We spend at the coalition probably 70% to 80% of our time fighting off regulatory creep and keeping the charter schools where they currently are. And right now we do have a friendly General Assembly. We have an unfriendly governor, and we have an unfriendly State Board of Education.
Let me ask for a clarification on something you said to make sure I understand it and our viewers understand it as well. You said 70,000 people are on wait lists. Does that mean that there are 70,000 families in North Carolina who want their child to be in a public charter school right now, but there is not a seat available?
That is correct. There are students, I should say, not 70,000 families, because there may be brothers and sisters.
Okay, students, all right.
In that number. But the fact that there's that many on a wait list.
So what has to happen to eliminate a wait list?
We have to have more charter schools, bottom line. And obtaining a charter for a school, going through the application process, is not for the faint of heart. It goes through a very tough process through the Charter School Advisory Board, then to the State Board of Education. And currently, the State Board of Education is the only authorizer of charter schools. The Charter School Advisory Board can give their recommendations to the state board, but it's up to those votes, those 11 votes on the State Board of Education, or Terry, I should say there's 13 votes, right? On the state board.
That's right. Yeah.
And this is so politically fragile that one election and it could be extremely tough on charter schools and on homeschooling too. I mean, again, our state legislature are the people that decide whether we have parent choice in North Carolina.
Shamika, I think you've converted Lyndalyn here today because now she's not going to say school choice. It's going to be about parent choice. Good for you, Shamika. You did your job.
Yay. But you know, I would like to add on with Linda, and this is important for us connecting resources and connecting with grassroots, connecting with parents, because a lot of our parents are voters, and when voters don't understand the significance, how their children's education go hand in hand with the people we elect, because the people we elect appoint the board members, right? And so when we don't understand how everything works, then we will vote for someone who's anti-school parents' choice, but the way they classify it is school choice, they will be anti parents' choice when it comes to schools by making up myths while you're the person that is voting for them and your child is in a program, whether it be a charter school, a private school, or at home. And so it's important for us to connect voters with what happens with the person is elected in office. I'm finding that because, like I said, we do a lot of grassroots, but when you have conversations about these particular programs, people are excited. And when they start finding out who's against the program, they realize that the person that they voted for, which is unfortunately a large part of the Democratic, those that are on the Democratic Party right now, a large portion of them do not support, but you do have some that do. And so you need to continue to vote for those that support our efforts with giving parents the choice when it comes to education. But we have to keep the voter informed, because it's not just that they're checking a block. These people, our elected officials, are making life decisions for everyone.
And at the legislature, of course, as you and Lyndalyn have laid out, and Angie as well, but Terry, also at the local level, if there's anything that the pandemic has shown us, it's that who sits on these local school boards is really, really important.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at issues from personnel to curriculum to finance. There's a great deal of autonomy given to not only school boards, but local schools, their administrators and their teachers. And so when you realize that in some areas there's a decentralization of power and authority, then you realize that if you want to make some change and if you want to have an impact on what happens in the classroom, sometimes the easiest and most direct way to do that is to do work on the local level.
Now, as we close out today, I want to make sure that our viewers know how to access resources and information about your individual groups. So, Shamika, how can folks contact you and find out more about the Frederick Douglass Foundation of North Carolina?
Yes. You can either do a quick Google. It says Frederick Douglass Foundation of North Carolina and pull up our site. But that site is FDFNC. That stands for Frederick Douglass Foundation of North Carolina.org. That's FDFNC.org.
Great. Angie, how can folks find out more about you and homeschooling?
My website is www.atced.com. And if you click on blog, the very first blog I have is Homeschooling in North Carolina as easy as 1, 2, 3. And I have taken and I have broken down into very easy steps to 3 of what you need to know about homeschooling in North Carolina. I also have a group on Facebook that's called n.c.homeschooling. There's a North Carolina flag at the top, and in the yellow banner it says supporting homeschool families. I'm not associated with this group, but the Homeschool Legal Defense, if you just Google youcanhomeschool.com, it will take you to everything you need to know about getting started when homeschooling. That's youcanhomeschool.com.
Great. And Lyndalyn, how about the North Carolina Coalition for Charter Schools?
It's nc.chartercoalition.org. And that's the easiest way to get me. Our website, my phone number, everything's on that.
And of course, reaching Terry and reading all the incredible analysis and research work that Terry does on all sorts of educational issues. You go to johnlocke.org and also the Locker Room blog there, and you'll find all of that information, as well as Dr. Bob Libke, who is a senior fellow who works with Terry at the Center for Effective Education. It's been great today. Thank you so much for joining us, all four of you. Really good information. Shamika Bethay, Angie Cutlip, Linda Lynn Kakadelis, and Dr. Terry Stoops. Thanks to everyone. Appreciate it. Have a good week.
Thank you, Donna.
Thank you.
And folks, thank you very much for joining us. This has been the fifth and final installment of our Thoughts and Thinkers Leadership Series, a special panel discussion series of the Shaftesbury Society. I hope that you have enjoyed it. If you've missed any of the 5 panel discussions, just go to johnlocke.org, click on the Events tab, and you can scroll through there and you can see all the videos of the 5 panels that we held. I've really enjoyed being a part of this. And thank you so much for tuning in and for wanting to be informed, to know more information about public policy in North Carolina on a variety of issues. Really appreciate that. We would ask you one final thing today, and that is, if you like what we're doing here at the John Locke Foundation, if you like the information, if you like the connection as much as we like being connected to you, we would ask you to consider a tax-deductible donation to help fund the work that we do. It's very fast and easy. Just go to johnlocke.org. In the upper right-hand corner, there's a Donate tab. Just click on that. It's safe, secure, and quick. We would certainly appreciate any support that you could give us. And again, it is tax-deductible. All right, next Monday is Labor Day. We will not be holding a Shaftesbury Society session. We hope that you have a long and productive weekend, but we will be back on the following Monday for another edition of Shaftesbury Society. I'm Donna Martinez on behalf of the entire John Locke Foundation team. Thank you for joining us. Have a great week.